In 1805, Congress named the small frontier settlement of Buffalo a port of entry on Lake Erie. At that time, Buffalo Harbor was little more than a sand-clogged creek mouth. In 1811, plans were made to build a lighthouse, but the outbreak of the War of 1812 and subsequent British burning of Buffalo in 1813 put those plans on hold. After the war ended, marine traffic into Buffalo increased. The port urgently needed a lighthouse and improvements to the harbor. The first Buffalo lighthouse was lighted in 1818, making it one of the first official lighthouses on the Great Lakes. The New York State Legislature also authorized money for improvements to the harbor, and piers were built. On the night of October 31, 1821, the first steamship on the Great Lakes, the Walk in the Water, was caught by a gale just off Buffalo Harbor and was beached a few yards from the lighthouse. A survivor of the wreck told the tale.
The boat struck a beach in a fortunate spot for the safety of the passengers and crew, near the lighthouse, and all were saved. The warm fireside we gathered around at the lighthouse was comforting to our chilled limbs, and our hearts warmed with gratitude to God for deliverance from our peril. Mrs. Alanson W. Welton, survivor of the Walk in the Water.
With the dedication of the Erie Canal in 1825 and the subsequent increase in marine traffic, the original lighthouse was declared inadequate. It was set too far back in the harbor and was often obscured by the smoke of the village. A new light was completed in 1833. The new light rose 68 feet and was erected on the end of a 1,400-foot stone pier. It was fitted with a Winslow Lewis Argand lamp. This lamp, now housed at the Buffalo and Erie County Historical Society, is the only known Argand lamp still in existence. It is the original lamp used in the Buffalo main light. The keeper's quarters remain more than 1,000 feet away on the land where the original lighthouse had stood.
At this lighthouse, all the keepers were men. The first keeper was a man named John Scatz, and he quickly drew criticism from some of the shipping interests in the harbor. They called him a man of dissolute morals and singularly obnoxious to the public, which may or may not be true, because back then there was a lot of competition for lighthouse appointments. The keeper of this light would have had to visit the light several times during the course of the day and the evening. His duty was to keep the tower in generally good condition, clean, keep up the maintenance on it. He would have had to clean the window glass in the lantern, the storm panes in the lantern, every day, inside and out. And if you visit the top, you'll see how scary that must have been. They're just basic handholds. OSHA didn't exist back then, and a very low railing that's just barely ankle high. So it would have been that kind of a tough job, but tending the light, he would have had to lug 5-gallon cans of oil up the steps, fill the reservoirs, trim the wicks, make sure the lights were burning brightly in the evening, and he would have had to come back and make sure of that at least once a night. Getting on and off the Horseshoe Reef Lighthouse was done by rowboat. It could only be done in a flat calm, so quite often the keepers were stranded out there. It was considered one of the worst duty stations in the lakes. Others were serviced off this point by boat. The third lighthouse was a very substantial brick house with a tower coming up through the middle of it and a fog signal building. Keepers lived out there on that lighthouse. And the modern one, the 1961, is completely automated, so that's serviced occasionally. The last keepers in Buffalo Harbor were at the South Buffalo Lighthouse, and they were Coast Guardsmen who were removed in 1962.
Later, in 1854, the light was heightened to 76 feet and fitted with a fourth-order Fresnel lens. But even this wasn't enough. Commerce in the port of Buffalo was still growing at a rapid pace. It was not unusual for 100 or more ships to visit the port of Buffalo every day. At the turn of the 20th century, this was the 7th busiest port in the world. Marine traffic in Buffalo Harbor continued to increase, and the need for more lights was urgent. Horseshoe Reef Light was built in 1856. The lighthouse was actually built on Middle Reef in Canadian waters. Today, it stands in American waters. The lighthouse never moved, the border did. The British government gave the United States permission to build the lighthouse in Canadian waters. In 1913, an international commission moved Canada 100 feet to the west of Horseshoe Reef Light. In 1868, a detached 4,000-foot breakwater was constructed over 2,000 feet out in front of the lighthouse. The Breakwater Lighthouse was built in 1872. The Breakwater Lighthouse was a magnet for ships. It was hit by a tug in 1899, by a barge in 1900, by a freighter in 1909, and by a steamer in 1910. The accidents weakened the structure, and in 1914, the Breakwater Light was rebuilt. That same year, the Buffalo Main Light went dark. The Breakwater's bright new beacon was deemed bright enough. On July 26, 1958, the huge lake freighter Frontenac swung out of the Buffalo River toward open water. A Coast Guard keeper on duty at the Breakwater Light noted with alarm that the ship's swing was much wider than usual. He watched the commotion on the ship as they tried to right the course, but it was too late. The Frontenac rammed the Breakwater Light with such force it knocked it backward 20 feet and gave it a permanent tilt. In 1961, that light was demolished and this one built to replace it. This modern breakwater light was automated from the start and sits on one of the longest breakwaters in the world. The Buffalo Intake Crib Light was built in 1871. The South Buffalo South Side Lighthouse was built in 1903, automated in 1962, and taken out of service in 1992. Sometimes lightships were used to help guide ships into Buffalo Harbor. A lightship was simply a ship with a beacon of light that functioned as a lighthouse. The lightships could be moved if needed and could be placed in areas where it would be extremely difficult to build and man a lighthouse. The lightships were built to withstand all kinds of seas and were anchored solidly in place. The Light Vessel 82 was one such lightship stationed near the Buffalo Harbor. During a fierce storm in November of 1913, the ship's beacon, which should have been visible for miles, vanished. It had become a victim of the 80-mile-an-hour winds, driving snow, and pounding waves of Lake Erie. More than a dozen ships and nearly 250 sailors met their end in that storm. Light Vessel 82 was only the second lightship in the Lighthouse Service's history to sink on station, and the first to go down with loss of all hands. 6 men died. The lightship was later salvaged from the bottom of Lake Erie and incredibly was restored and put back into service again on the Great Lakes. In the early 1960s, the Army Corps of Engineers announced plans to widen the river mouth and demolish the Buffalo Main Light. But public protest and a Save the Light campaign resulted in the restoration of the long-neglected tower. The light from 1833 became Buffalo's oldest building still standing on its original site. In 1985, the Buffalo Lighthouse Association was formed, which undertook further improvements to the tower. A new lens was placed in the tower, and it was relit to open the first International Friendship Festival in 1987. In August 2013, the Fourth Order Fresnel lens, which desperately needed preservation work, was removed from the lighthouse. It was restored and placed on display at the Heritage Discovery Center. In 2015, a new replica lens similar to that used from 1856 to 1905 was installed in the Buffalo Main Lighthouse and lit for the first time in 2016. It is now lit for show only, intentionally kept weak to avoid confusing mariners. The lighthouse can best be viewed from the Erie Basin Marina.
Now available on DVD or Blu-ray, the WPBS-TV production of New York Seaway Lighthouses, featuring the fascinating histories of over 20 different lighthouses along the shores of New York Seaway Trail. Order your copy today.
New York Seaway Lighthouses is sponsored by the Department of the Interior National Park Service and by Taste New York at the North Country Welcome Center overlooking the Thousand Islands Bridge.